Imagine raising a child alone, pouring every dream, every sacrifice, every dollar into her future. Imagine building investments in her name so she'll never struggle like you did. And then, one ordinary night, you scroll through social media and see it. Your daughter, in a wedding gown, surrounded by strangers, married. And she never told you. That's exactly what happened to Phyna, a single mother who gave her daughter Cynthia the world. Before we dive into the story, we would love to know where you're watching from. Kindly drop your location in the comment box.
Cynthia had always been the kind of woman people admired from a distance. Smart, soft-spoken, graceful, and successful in a way that made her coworkers whisper, "She's going places." She owed most of that success to one person, her mother, Phyna. Phyna had raised her alone. No husband, no partner, no family to lean on. Just determination, grit, and the kind of love that pushes a mother to sacrifice everything for her child's future. Over the years, Phyna invested every extra dollar she had in Cynthia's name. Stocks, bonds, a small stake in 2 real estate properties. It was her quiet promise, "My daughter will never struggle the way I did." By 27, Cynthia was earning well, and on top of that, those investments her mother built for her paid generous dividends every quarter. She lived comfortably, maybe too comfortably, and that comfort was part of how Brian slid into her life so easily. Brian was charming at first glance, handsome in a boyish way, always smiling, always talking big dreams. But behind the charm was a man whose family lived off illusions of wealth, designer clothes bought on credit, vacations taken for the pictures, not the experience, a lifestyle that looked rich from the outside and hollow from the inside. They loved Cynthia for one reason: she was the real source of money. From the moment Cynthia introduced Brian to her mother, Phyna felt uneasy. Something about the young man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Something about how he watched Cynthia, not with admiration, but calculation. But Cynthia, desperate for love after years of solitude, didn't see any of the warning signs. Brian began shaping her life slowly, gently at first. "Your mom calls too much, don't you think? Phyna's opinions are great, but you're an adult now, babe. You don't always need to tell her everything." And then it shifted into something firmer, something colder. "You need to learn to make decisions without her. Why are you always defending your mom? I want a wife who puts me first, Cynthia, not her." Piece by piece, he pushed Cynthia away from the woman who had raised her, and little by little, she let him. The wedding happened fast. Too fast. Brian's parents insisted a small courthouse ceremony was intimate and beautiful. They told Cynthia, "Don't stress your mother with all the planning." And Brian repeated the same thing until Cynthia caved. So one quiet Thursday afternoon, dressed in a simple cream gown, Cynthia stood beside Brian, surrounded only by his family. She signed her name on a marriage certificate that her mother didn't even know existed. The joy in Brian's family was loud, exaggerated, almost theatrical. They laughed, hugged, took pictures, and showered her with compliments that felt too sugary to be real. Cynthia smiled through it all, but in the back of her mind, a soft voice whispered, "Mama should have been here." But she silenced that voice. Brian had convinced her it was better this way. Later that evening, her phone buzzed with notifications. Brian had posted the wedding photos. The caption read, "Finally married the love of my life." Friends congratulated them. Colleagues were shocked. And miles away, in her small living room after a long day at work, Phyna sat alone scrolling through Facebook. She stopped suddenly. Her breath hitched. There it was, Cynthia, in a wedding dress, smiling, surrounded by strangers, married. She stared at her phone as if it had just delivered a fatal blow. Her chest tightened, her fingers trembled, her heart felt like it was sinking deeper with every second. Her only child had gotten married, and she found out the same way the world did, through a social media post. The room went quiet, too quiet. Phyna put the phone down, wiped her face slowly, and whispered the words that would mark the beginning of a long, painful journey. "So this is how you repay me, Cynthia." The night Cynthia's wedding photos hit social media, something inside Phyna shifted. Quietly, painfully, like a piece of her heart tearing at the seams. She didn't scream. She didn't cry loudly. She just sat there, staring at the screen, her eyes locked on her daughter's smile. A smile she had never seen on Cynthia's face before. A smile that wasn't meant for her. She replayed every moment of Cynthia's life in her mind. The first day of school, when Cynthia clung to her leg, refusing to enter the classroom. The teenage years filled with late-night talks and shared bowls of ice cream. The graduation ceremony, where Cynthia ran off the stage into her arms thanking her for everything. Not once did she imagine she'd be left out of the moment every mother dreams of being part of. "Married," she whispered again, voice cracking. "My child is married." Her chest tightened, not from anger, but from betrayal she never saw coming. The next morning, one of Phyna's closest friends, Aunt Rita, stopped by. She knocked on the front door and stepped in with her usual loud voice. "Phyna, I saw something online." Then she stopped. One look at Phyna's swollen eyes, and she understood. "Oh, my dear," Rita whispered, sitting beside her. "Why didn't she tell you?" Phyna forced a bitter smile. "Because she didn't want me there." "That can't be true," Rita insisted, placing a hand on her shoulder. But Phyna shook her head, slowly, deliberately. "If she wanted me, she would have called. If she needed me, she would have come home. But she didn't." Her voice hardened. "She chose them." Rita sighed. "What will you do? Will you confront her?" "No." The answer was instant. Rita blinked, surprised. "No?" "I will not beg to be part of my own daughter's life," Phyna said, lifting her chin. "I raised her to be strong, to make her own decisions. She chose this path." "But Phyna." "No," she repeated, "no. No calls, no messages. I'm done after chasing after her." For a moment, silence filled the room. Heavy, cold, honest. Phyna wasn't a woman of theatrics. She wasn't dramatic or easily rattled. But this cut so deeply that something inside her sealed shut. Meanwhile, across town, Cynthia lay in bed next to Brian, scrolling through congratulatory comments. Her heart fluttered with excitement. But beneath that excitement, something else nagged at her. Her mother hadn't reacted. No call, no message, nothing. Cynthia swallowed hard. "Maybe I should call my mom," she whispered. Brian barely looked up from his phone. "For what? To ruin the mood?" Cynthia frowned. "Brian, she's my mother." "She'll get over it," he muttered. "Don't start creating unnecessary drama. Today is about us." But Cynthia's heart was uneasy. She tried to smile, tried to push away the guilt that rose like a tide in her chest. Brian's hand slid around her waist, warm and possessive. "Relax," he said softly. "Your mom has always controlled your life. This is the first thing you've done for yourself. Be proud of it." Cynthia nodded, but the guilt didn't ease. It grew heavier. And miles away, Phyna went about her day with quiet determination. She cooked, she cleaned, she organized old papers. But no matter what she did, the image of Cynthia in that cream wedding dress haunted every corner of her mind. That night, after closing her shop, she sat at her desk looking at a stack of documents documents tied to investments she had built for her daughter over the years. A lifetime of sacrifice, discipline, and motherly foresight. She ran her fingers across Cynthia's name printed on top. For a long moment she hesitated. Her heart begged her not to do it. Her pride pushed her forward. Finally, with a deep breath, she whispered to the empty room, "If she doesn't need me in her life, then she doesn't need the plans I made for her either." And with that, Phyna made a decision, a quiet, decisive one, that would change everything. A decision she didn't announce, a decision she didn't explain, a decision she believed was long overdue. She picked up the phone, not to call Cynthia, but to call her financial advisor. The slow unraveling had begun.
2 weeks passed before Cynthia realized something was wrong. At first, she ignored the strange feeling in her stomach when she checked her investment account and saw the silence. No alerts, no upcoming dividend notifications, nothing. She assumed it was a system glitch. She even told Brian, who shrugged and said, "These things happen." But Cynthia knew her mother's investments. Phyna never missed a payout, never skipped an update. Everything had always been carefully organized, predictable, steady, like her mother. Cynthia tried not to overthink it. She told herself she would reach out to her mother soon, maybe after the honeymoon plans, maybe after things with Brian settled, maybe after she built the courage to face the woman she had excluded from the biggest day of her life. But soon turned into avoidance, and avoidance turned into guilt. Still, she didn't call. Meanwhile, for Phyna, life had taken a new shape. The day after contacting her financial advisor, she transferred every investment, every bond, every share, every rental stake back into her own name. It wasn't done out of spite. It was done out of survival. She had spent almost 3 decades pouring her heart and finances into one person. Maybe it was time to pour into herself. For the first time in years, she felt free. No longer did she wake up worrying about Cynthia's future. No longer did she carry the weight of ensuring her daughter lived comfortably. She finally allowed herself to breathe, to dream again, to imagine a life that wasn't defined solely by motherhood. She expanded her shop, hired an assistant, joined a small business network, even attended a community event, something she had never done before. People began to notice the glow returning to her cheeks, the confidence in her step. Phyna wasn't moving on from her daughter. She was rediscovering herself. But Cynthia's world was slowly becoming unsteady. One night, she sat at the dining room table, laptop open, frustration tightening her jaw. "Brian, the dividends still haven't come in." Brian looked up from his game controller, annoyed. "You worry too much." "This isn't normal," Cynthia replied, voice tense. "My mom's investments always pay on schedule, always." "Maybe she made a mistake," he said casually. "My mom doesn't make financial mistakes," Cynthia shot back. Brian paused his game, leaned back, and folded his arms. "So what are you saying? That she's trying to punish you?" Cynthia hesitated. "I don't know." "Well, what if she is?" His voice hardened. "Honestly, Cynthia, your mother has been controlling your life since you were a kid. Maybe she didn't like that you finally made a decision without her." "That's not fair," Cynthia whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Brian pressed on. "You said yourself she's overprotective. Maybe she's upset you didn't let her run the wedding." Cynthia's stomach churned. He was twisting reality, but she was too emotionally drained to fight him. Brian stood up and walked over to her. "Look, you're my wife now. We don't need her money. You make great money. I make enough. We're fine." But they weren't fine. Brian's family relied heavily on Cynthia, on her salary, her savings, her generosity. Their expenses were high, and Brian's job didn't cover half of what he pretended it did. Deep down, Cynthia knew the dividends mattered. Not because she was greedy, but because they had always been a safety net, a cushion, a symbol of her mother's love and foresight. And now they were gone. Later that night, when Brian fell asleep, Cynthia slipped quietly out of bed and stepped into the hallway. She dialed her mother's number. Her thumb trembled over the call button. She hesitated. The guilt was suffocating. Finally, she pressed call. The phone rang 3 times, 4, 5. Then it silenced. No answer. Cynthia's heart dropped. She tried again. This time, the call went straight to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She couldn't. Her throat was tight, her chest aching. For the first time since the wedding, Cynthia felt truly alone. And miles away, on the other side of town, Phyna lay awake in bed. She had seen the missed calls. She had felt the vibration of the phone. Her heart had leapt instinctively, but she didn't pick up. She wasn't ready. For the first time in Cynthia's life, the mother who had always been there wasn't, and that silence spoke louder than any words could ever.
Brian's smile had changed. It wasn't noticeable at first, just a slight tightening around the corners of his mouth, a flicker of annoyance when Cynthia questioned something, a sharpness in his tone when she hesitated before agreeing with him. But now, everything felt different. Cynthia noticed it one Saturday morning when she came back from the grocery store. She'd bought only essentials, carefully calculating every item because the dividend income she once relied on had vanished without explanation. As she set the bags on the counter, Brian glanced through them with a frown. "Where are the steaks I told you to get?" he asked. "They were too expensive this week," Cynthia replied softly, "and we still have chicken in the freezer." "Why are you suddenly being cheap?" "I'm not being cheap. I'm being careful. Something's going on with the investments." "Your mother probably messed something up." "She never messes up, and you know it." For a brief moment, his eyes darkened. "You're defending her again?" Cynthia didn't answer. She didn't want to fight. She walked away, but Brian grabbed her wrist lightly, not painful, but firm enough to send a message. "Hey, I'm talking to you." She stiffened. The crack in her heart widened just a little more. Later that evening, after Brian left to meet his friends, Cynthia sat alone on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Bills, credit card reminders, rent, payments she'd taken on for Brian's family, medical bills, car repairs, even a small loan for his sister that was supposed to be temporary. Her chest tightened. She loved Brian. She really did. But she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She was drowning financially, and he didn't seem to care. Across town, Phyna was thriving. Her shop had grown busier since she hired an assistant. She felt lighter, freer, yet the ache of Cynthia's absence lingered beneath the surface. She had heard through a neighbor that Cynthia seemed stressed lately. She pretended she didn't care, but at night she found herself staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd done the right thing. One afternoon, Cynthia decided she couldn't wait anymore. She had to face what she'd been avoiding. She called the investment firm. The representative confirmed it. The accounts were transferred, legally, permanently, back to her mother. Cynthia hung up slowly, her hand trembling. Her throat felt tight, and tears blurred her vision. Her mother hadn't just stopped the dividends, she had taken everything back. Every investment, every plan, every safety net. It felt like a punch to the chest. When Brian returned later that night, Cynthia confronted him gently. "My mom, she changed the investments. They're all gone." "You're kidding." "No," Cynthia whispered. "They're in her name now." Brian paced the room, running a frustrated hand through his hair. "Great. Just great. That woman is unbelievable." "She's my mother, Brian. And she's ruining our lives." She flinched. Our lives? She repeated slowly. You mean your lifestyle? He stopped and turned sharply. What did you say? Cynthia backed up a step. She hadn't meant to say it out loud, but it was true. His expensive tastes, his family's constant requests, their never-ending need for her money, it was all adding up. Brian's jaw tightened. If your mom wasn't so selfish— Brian, stop! She snapped. My mother is not selfish. She sacrificed everything for me. He moved closer, lowering his voice, but not the hostility behind it. And look how you repay her, by letting her control our marriage. She shook her head slowly. That's not what's happening. Oh? Then why do you look like you're about to cry over money she decided to keep for herself? Tell me, Cynthia, whose side are you on? The room fell silent, painful, cold, heavy. For the first time, she truly saw him. Not the charm, not the smiles, not the promises. She saw the control, the entitlement, the manipulation. And she wondered how long these cracks had been there, and how she had ignored them for so long. Meanwhile, in the quiet of her home, Phyna stood by her window, staring out into the night. She had no idea her daughter's marriage was beginning to crumble. She had no idea that Cynthia's world was shifting, slowly collapsing under the weight of her own choices. And she had no idea that her daughter was about to uncover a truth, one that would change everything. Because Cynthia was right. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And she was about to find out just how deep the cracks in her marriage went.
Cynthia woke the next morning with a heaviness in her chest she couldn't shake off. Brian's words from the night before replayed in her mind like a broken recording, sharp, cruel, and coated with entitlement. She had always known he liked comfort, but she never imagined he valued her money more than her well-being. She made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the swirling steam. For the first time since their wedding, she let herself ask a question she'd been too afraid to face. What if I made a mistake? The thought sent a tremor through her body. She loved Brian, or the version of him she met in the beginning, but lately she felt more alone beside him than she ever did when she was single. A notification chimed on her phone. A credit card payment. Another one. Her heart sank deeper. Everywhere she looked, the walls of their marriage felt like they were closing in. Later that afternoon, Cynthia came home earlier than usual. Brian sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, feet propped up, a half-eaten sandwich on a plate beside him. She stood in front of him quietly. "Brian, we need to talk." He didn't look up. "Can it wait? I'm doing something." "No," she said softly, "it can't." Something in her tone made him lower his phone, though he didn't hide the irritation on his face. "Fine. What's your latest problem?" Cynthia swallowed, gathering her courage. "I called the investment firm. They said my mom transferred everything back to herself." Brian rolled his eyes. "You already told me that." "But I didn't tell you the rest," she continued. "The advisor said she made the transfer the same day she saw the wedding photos, the same day we got married." "That's her problem," Brian snapped. "She's punishing you." "She's hurt, Brian. I left her out of my wedding. Cynthia paused, her voice breaking. "I betrayed her." "You didn't betray her. She's just dramatic, overreacting like she always does." Cynthia shook her head. "No, she was right. About you. About everything." His eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" She took a breath. "I've been paying for everything. Your family's bills, your sister's debt, your car repairs. I'm covered in responsibilities that aren't mine, and you don't care. You've never cared." His jaw tightened. "Careful, Cynthia." "Why? Because you'll yell?
Because you'll twist it into being my fault? I'm tired, Brian. I'm exhausted. And I don't feel like your wife. I feel like your bank account." A dangerous silence settled between them. Then Brian stepped closer, his voice low and icy. "Everything we have, everything, we built together." "No," she corrected gently. "I built it, and you took it." His face twitched, anger tightening his features. "Your mother poisoned you. She's turning you against me." Cynthia's eyes filled with tears, not of weakness, but clarity. "She didn't have to poison me. I just opened my eyes." Brian stared at her for several long seconds, breathing hard, his fists clenching at his sides. Then, without warning, he grabbed his keys and stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. Cynthia sank onto the couch, tears spilling as she buried her face in her hands. For the first time since she married him, she didn't try to run from her pain. She let it hit her, wash over her, break her open. Hours later, when the apartment finally grew quiet, she whispered into the empty room, "I need my mum." But she didn't call. She didn't text. She just sat there, trembling. Across town, Phyna was setting her dinner on the table when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw Cynthia's name flash briefly. It was a missed call from earlier in the day. Her heart tightened. She placed the phone face down and forced herself to breathe slowly. "Not yet," she whispered to herself. "I'm not ready." But in her chest a small crack formed, just large enough for worry to seep through. Meanwhile, Cynthia lay curled on the couch, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know what tomorrow held. She only knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something in her marriage had shattered. And once something truly breaks, it rarely returns to the way it was.
The sun was barely up when Cynthia stepped out of bed the next morning. She felt hollow, like her heart had been scraped clean overnight. Brian hadn't come home. Not a text, not a call, nothing. The silence spoke louder than any argument they'd ever had. She walked through the apartment quietly, looking at everything with new eyes. The furniture she paid for, the rent she carried, the bills addressed to her inbox, the credit notifications, even the groceries lined up neatly in the kitchen. This was her life, yet she didn't feel at home in it. Brian's influence lingered in every corner, like a shadow she couldn't escape. Her chest tightened. Staying felt like drowning. Leaving felt like betrayal. But she remembered her mother's voice from childhood, quiet and steady. "When something hurts you more than it heals you, walk away." That morning, Cynthia packed. Not everything, just the essentials. A suitcase of clothes, a few personal files, her laptop, her grandmother's necklace that Phyna had given her when she got her first job. As she zipped the suitcase shut, the weight of the moment hit her. She was leaving her marriage. She didn't know for how long. She didn't know what Brian would do. She didn't know what his family would say. But she knew who she needed. She needed her mother. She left the apartment quietly, closing the door with a trembling hand. The hallway felt colder. The elevator ride felt longer. And when she stepped outside and inhaled fresh morning air, she felt something lift from her shoulders, something heavy she hadn't realized was suffocating her. The drive to her mother's house felt like a confession. Every mile, every street, every turn whispered, "You're going home." Phyna was in the backyard watering her plants when she heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into her driveway. She assumed it was a delivery, or perhaps Rita stopping by unexpectedly. But when she turned around, she froze. Cynthia stood at the gate, suitcase in hand, eyes swollen and glassy, shoulders slumped. For a moment, neither of them moved.
Cynthia's lips trembled as she whispered, "Mama." The watering can slipped slightly in Phyna's hand. Her heart cracked open in a way she hadn't allowed since the wedding. But she didn't rush forward. She didn't melt. She didn't scold. She simply stared, her emotions tangled. Hurt, love, anger, relief, confusion. Cynthia stepped forward, voice breaking. "I'm sorry." Just one sentence, but it carried the weight of everything. Every mistake, every hurtful choice, every moment she let Brian pull her away. Phyna swallowed, her throat tight. "Why are you here, Cynthia?" Cynthia wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. I left Brian. I didn't know where else to go." Silence stretched between them, long, raw, fragile. Phyna finally placed the watering can down and walked toward her daughter, slowly, carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. When she reached her, she looked into Cynthia's eyes, those same eyes she had watched grow from infancy to adulthood, the same eyes that used to look at her like she hung the moon. Now they were filled with pain. "What happened?" Phyna asked softly. Cynthia broke then. The tears came hard and fast. She whispered everything: Brian's demands, his coldness, the financial strain, the manipulation, the argument, the fear, the guilt. Phyna listened in silence. At the end, Cynthia whispered, "I thought he loved me, Mama." Phyna exhaled slowly. "And you? Do you still love him?" Cynthia hesitated, then shook her head slightly. "I don't know. I just know he doesn't make me feel safe anymore." That was all Phyna needed to hear. She stepped forward and pulled her daughter into her arms. Cynthia melted into her, sobbing into her shoulder like she had when she was 5 years old, scared of thunderstorms. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I hurt you. I left you out. I did everything wrong." Phyna stroked her back gently. "Hush, you're home now." It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was the beginning. After a long while, Phyna guided her inside the house. "Come," she said softly, "let's get you settled." As Cynthia stepped into her childhood home, she felt a sense of safety she hadn't felt in months, maybe years. But the peace wouldn't last long. Her phone vibrated violently in her pocket. She pulled it out. 15 missed calls from Brian, 8 from his mother, 4 from his sister, and a series of text messages loading one after another. As the notifications filled her screen, her hands began to shake. Phyna noticed. "What's going on?" Cynthia whispered, "He knows I left." Her voice trembled. "And he's not going to let me go that easily."
Cynthia barely slept that first night back in her mother's home. She lay awake in her old bedroom, walls still faintly smelling of childhood memories, while her phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand. Message after message. Brian begging, Brian accusing, Brian threatening, Brian promising. His family chimed in too, insisting she was overreacting, telling her she owed Brian another chance, reminding her of everything they had done for her, conveniently forgetting everything she had done for them. At one point, Cynthia started to reach for her phone, tempted to respond. Maybe to defend herself. Maybe to explain. Maybe to apologize for leaving. But then a soft knock landed on her door, and Phyna's voice drifted through. "Get some rest, Cynthia. You're safe here." Safe. That one word settled Cynthia's heart, and for the first time since she said, "I do," she believed it. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the kitchen as Cynthia sat at the table with a cup of tea. Phyna moved calmly around the room, preparing breakfast, like she had done so many mornings in the past. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Cynthia cleared her throat. "Mama, thank you for letting me come home." Phyna nodded, but her expression was serious. "You will always have a home here, but we need to talk honestly." Cynthia braced herself. Phyna sat across from her. "I'm not angry that you got married, Cynthia. I'm hurt that you hid it. I raised you as a single mother, gave you everything I had, not for you to repay me, but because I wanted you to have choices I never did." Her voice softened, but the pain underneath it was unmistakable. "You shut me out, child. You shut me out of the biggest moment of your life." Cynthia felt tears prick her eyes again. "I know. I was wrong, and I let Brian influence me. I didn't see what he was doing until it was too late." "You saw it. You just weren't ready to accept it." Cynthia lowered her head. "Maybe. Love can blind even the strongest of us. But when you walked through that gate with your suitcase, I knew you had opened your eyes." Silence settled again, this time filled with not tension, but with understanding. After a long pause, Cynthia whispered, "Mama, do you think I can fix my life?" Phyna reached across the table and held her daughter's hand. "Your life isn't broken. It's just beginning." Over the next few weeks, Cynthia stayed with her mother. She found a therapist who helped her unravel the emotional knots Brian had tied around her confidence. She returned to work, really returned to work, focused, determined, rediscovering her sense of self. Brian continued calling, sometimes begging, sometimes threatening legal action, sometimes blaming her for his family's financial struggles. But Cynthia didn't respond. She blocked the numbers. She filed for separation. She met with a lawyer who assured her that her mother's assets, rightfully back under Phyna's name, were completely untouchable. Brian panicked. His family panicked even more. But that was no longer Cynthia's concern. Every day she felt a little lighter. She cooked with her mother. She walked through her old neighborhood. She began saving again. She invested for herself, slowly, carefully, with her own name written boldly on every document. Phyna didn't hover, didn't intrude, didn't smother her with guilt. She simply supported her, quietly, firmly, without conditions. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Cynthia sighed deeply. "I feel free." Phyna smiled softly. "Freedom is expensive. You paid for it with pain, but now you know your worth." Cynthia leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I don't know where I'd be without you." "No," Phyna corrected gently. "You don't know where you'd be without yourself. I raised you to stand strong. You finally remembered how." Cynthia closed her eyes, letting those words settle. Her marriage had crumbled, her illusions had shattered, but something far more valuable had been rebuilt.
her relationship with her mother, her independence, her sense of self-worth, and her future. And as the last light of the day painted the sky in gold and orange, Cynthia whispered a promise, not to Brian, not to society, not even to Phyna, but to herself. Never again will I let someone dim my life. And Phyna, with quiet pride, squeezed her daughter's hand. You learned, my child. That is the greatest wealth you'll ever have.